She sold the only keepsake from the great love of her life, just to feed her daughter. In the worst financial crisis she'd ever faced, this brave mother gave up her late husband's wedding ring. But after leaving the grocery store, she made a simple act of kindness and ended up receiving an unbelievable gift from fate. A plot twist that not even the most emotional films could imagine. This story will make you rethink what faith, love, and courage truly mean. Alyssa was always one of those women you look at and think, how does she carry so much weight on her own? But she never saw herself that way. If you asked her, she'd just say she was a mother doing what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet behind those tired brown eyes, behind the worn-out shirt that smelled of cheap soap, there was a strength beyond words. A strength born from love, from pain, and from loss. The small town where she lived, in rural Georgia, had just over 10,000 residents. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and gossip travels faster than the wind. Alyssa grew up there, and it was also where she met the only love of her life, Michael. They bumped into each other for the first time at the corner diner when she was only 19, and he was 21. He was in uniform, recently back from military service, and she was working as a waitress to help care for her sick mother at home. All it took was a smile, shy but genuine, and he was in love. She took a little longer, but by the time she realized it, he was already part of the family. They married young. They didn't have much money, but they had the kind of love that warms even the coldest days. Michael was a mechanic and started a small but honest repair shop. Alyssa took care of the house, and after their daughter was born, she lived entirely for her. They named the girl Emily, the name Michael had said he'd give his daughter since he was a boy. Emily grew up surrounded by love. She was cheerful, curious, one of those kids always asking why about everything. Michael always said she had her mother's eyes and her father's courage. The three of them were inseparable. They had little, but they were happy. Until one cloudy evening, the phone rang. Alyssa knew something was wrong just by the way the sound echoed through the house. Michael never came home without saying something. He always texted, always let her know where he was, even if it was just a quick stop at the store. The accident happened on the road leading to the town center. A truck lost control and swerved into oncoming traffic. Michael didn't have time to brake. The crash was fatal. Alyssa collapsed. The ground vanished. Life lost all meaning. Overnight, she wasn't a wife anymore. She was a widow. There was no time for full mourning because Emily, only 9 years old, still needed her. And Alyssa knew she couldn't give up. Her daughter had lost her father, but she couldn't lose her mother, too. The life insurance was small, barely enough to cover the debts from the repair shop, which shut down months later. Alyssa tried everything. She cleaned houses, cared for the elderly, sold sweets at school, anything to put food on the table and keep the rent paid. Years went by, but the struggle only got harder. When Emily turned 15, Alyssa could barely afford a birthday cake. The girl, already aware of her mother's sacrifices, never complained. On the contrary, she helped however she could. She took care of the house, studied with dedication, and often left little notes around the home reminding her mother how much she loved her. But life, cruel and unpredictable as it is, decided to test Alyssa once again. A health issue took her out of work for weeks. A deep cut on her hand during a cleaning job turned into a severe infection. She needed expensive antibiotics, couldn't lift anything, and lost 2 of the few clients she had left. The money ran out. Literally, there was no food in the pantry. The rent was overdue. And worst of all, Emily was starting to lose weight, even though she pretended everything was fine. On that freezing November morning, Alyssa opened the little jewelry box hidden at the back of the closet. Inside was only one item of real value, the wedding ring Michael had slipped onto her finger on a sunny spring day, under a tree in the town park. She held it between her trembling fingers. It was yellow gold, simple, not very detailed, but it carried a whole history. It was all she had left of him. His touch, his scent, his presence. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring for a long time. She cried silently. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a piece of her heart. But Alyssa knew Emily needed to eat, and a brave mother does what needs to be done, even if her chest bleeds. Downtown, she found a small pawn shop. The man behind the counter was curt, as if time had hardened even his voice. He examined the ring, offered less than she'd hoped, but she accepted. She didn't argue, took the money, and left. She went straight to the market, bought rice, beans, eggs, milk, and some vegetables. She thought about buying meat, but the prices were far too high. On her way out, with bags heavy in her arms and her heart still heavier, she saw an old lady sitting on the sidewalk. She must have been about 80, wearing a tattered coat and holding a small basket with some lottery tickets. "Please, sweetheart, buy a ticket to help this old lady," she said with a gentle smile and tired eyes. Alyssa hesitated. The money was tight, but something inside her, a feeling, an invisible force, made her stop. Maybe it was the memory of Michael, who always helped everyone. Maybe it was just the need to feel less powerless. She pulled a crumpled bill from her pocket and handed it over. "Just one, please." The woman handed her the ticket with a sparkle in her eyes and held Alyssa's hand for a moment. "Thank you, my dear. God bless you." Alyssa smiled back, eyes filled with tears, and kept walking home. She had no idea that this simple gesture would change absolutely everything. Alyssa got home with her arms aching from the grocery bags, her feet frozen, and her heart torn between guilt and relief. Emily was sitting on the couch, a thin blanket wrapped around her legs, reading the same book she had already read 1,000 times. When she saw her mom walk in, she rushed to help. "Mom, you managed to buy all this?" Alyssa smiled, trying to hide her exhaustion. "I did, sweetheart. Tonight we're making some well-seasoned rice with eggs, just the way you like it." Emily noticed the effort, the red eyes, the forced smile. But as always, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged her tightly, a hug that said, "Thank you for not giving up." That night, as they sat at the table with a simple meal made with love, it was one of the quietest nights they'd ever had, because they both knew what was behind that warm plate of food. Emily didn't ask where the money came from, but Alyssa, between spoonfuls, said softly, "I sold the ring, honey." The girl paused, lowered her gaze. She bit her lips, trying to hold back the emotion. It was the only memory of her father they had left. But she didn't complain. "You did it for me, didn't you? I did it for us. And he would understand, I'm sure." Emily got up and hugged her mother from behind. "You're the bravest person I know." That night, Alyssa had trouble sleeping. Michael's face appeared in the flickering memories of the pawn shop, the old lady with the ticket, her daughter holding her in silence. The lottery ticket was on the nightstand. She looked at it several times, but couldn't remember the last time she believed in luck. 2 days later, the winning numbers were announced. Alyssa didn't even know the day of the draw, but by coincidence, she was in line at the store again, buying what little she could with the leftover change. When she saw the numbers on the TV hanging above the checkout, she frowned, pulled the ticket from her worn-out bag, and started comparing. First number, matched. Second, matched too. Third, also. And so on. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Her heart began pounding. Her hands trembled when she realized every single number was there, lined up. She accidentally dropped the ticket on the floor. "Ma'am, are you okay?" asked the cashier. Alyssa didn't answer. She picked up the ticket, read it again, then again. She was afraid to believe. A younger employee came closer and, seeing the woman's reaction, asked to look at the ticket. "Ma'am, This is the winning ticket, the jackpot. You won. Alyssa's knees buckled. She had to hold on to the counter to keep from falling. People around her started gathering, whispering. The manager was called. Within minutes, Alyssa was surrounded by people trying to understand what was going on. But she was only thinking of one thing, Emily. She left the store stumbling slightly, the ticket clutched tightly in her fingers. She called the lottery claim center, which confirmed the information. She had won the weekly jackpot. A few days later, sitting in front of a bank manager, she heard the full number with all the zeros. $2,000, $2 million. The woman who, just days ago, didn't have food on the table, now had enough to completely change her and her daughter's lives. But wealth, contrary to what many think, doesn't fix everything overnight. The challenges changed shape, but didn't disappear. First came the newspapers. The whole town found out. Everyone wanted to know who the woman was who had won the lottery buying a ticket on the sidewalk. They called her house, showed up uninvited. People who had never been close came with requests. Fake smiles, empty promises. Alyssa, still wounded and mentally exhausted, had to learn to say no. And that might have been the hardest part. She hired a lawyer, a social worker who had heard her story and was deeply moved, recommended an honest accountant. For the first time in years, Alyssa had real help, people who wanted to see her rise, not out of interest, but out of empathy. She decided to invest wisely, bought a small but comfortable house, paid Emily's school tuition in advance, saved most of the money, and, of course, went back to the pawn shop. The same man was there and recognized her immediately. "Here to get the ring back?" he asked, almost expressionless. "Yes, I won the lottery," she replied, looking him in the eyes. "And I want it back." She paid gladly. When she held the ring in her hands again, it felt like a part of Michael had returned home. She no longer wore it on her finger, but kept it in a special box next to a photo of him smiling. But not everything was about money. Emily, now 15, carried the scars of the hard times they had lived through. She was afraid of losing again, afraid that happiness wouldn't last. She started having anxiety attacks, struggling to trust people. Alyssa realized her daughter needed more than comfort. She needed to be heard, to be seen. They began going to therapy together. It was tough at first, digging into old wounds, reliving loss. But there, hand in hand in a quiet room, mother and daughter began to rebuild themselves. Therapy didn't bring Michael back. It didn't erase the years of struggle, but it healed important pieces that had been broken. And during one of those sessions, Emily said something Alyssa would never forget. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. You saved me." Alyssa cried, not from sadness, but from relief, because in the end, all she had ever wanted was to protect her daughter. And now, through pain and hardship, but also through love and courage, she had succeeded. Life started to find a new rhythm. No rush, no excessive luxury, just stability, safety, peace. But Alyssa's story was far from over. In the months following the prize, Alyssa rediscovered what it meant to live without the constant fear of tomorrow. After years of walking on the edge of the abyss, the ground finally felt steady beneath her feet. But it wasn't just the money that had transformed her life. It was something deeper, a new beginning that came from within, a rebuilding of the soul. Emily, now 15, began to blossom slowly. She started attending a new school, where she was welcomed with more warmth than suspicion. Even with the money, Alyssa chose to keep a low profile. She didn't want her daughter to grow up surrounded by empty flattery or attracting too many curious stares. She wanted Emily to have the freedom to simply be a teenager, and that began to happen. The girl started smiling more often. She developed an interest in music, began learning guitar, and dreamed of getting into an arts college. Little by little, the once silent bedroom began to fill with soft notes, sometimes shy, other times full of emotion. Alyssa would listen from the doorway, heart full. Those sounds were like patches for the soul, small signs of healing. Even so, something still bothered Alyssa, a restless feeling, as if the story wasn't complete. Something inside her told her that the ticket hadn't been just luck. There was purpose, a greater reason behind that encounter with the old lady on the sidewalk. Part of her wanted to find that woman again, the ticket woman, the one who, without knowing, had sparked the flame that changed everything. For weeks, Alyssa returned to the town center multiple times. She asked local shopkeepers, described the woman, even showed a sketch Emily had drawn based on her mother's memory. But no one seemed to know who she was. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere and vanished with the wind. Until one Saturday morning, while having coffee on the porch, she received a letter, no return address, a simple envelope with handwriting that simply read, "For you." Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Alyssa, the universe always returns gestures made from the heart. That day, you gave me more than money. You gave me hope. I knew that ticket was special, but I needed to find someone with a pure soul to receive it. And when I saw your eyes, tired but full of love, I knew. May your journey now be light. With love. Signed, you know who." Alyssa froze for a few seconds. Something in those words felt profoundly true. It was as if that old woman had been sent by someone. Maybe by Michael. Maybe by God. Maybe by the invisible hands of life. She cried, out of gratitude, out of awe, out of reverence for something greater than herself. It was that day Alyssa realized her story couldn't belong to her alone. She started writing. She didn't exactly know how, but she needed to put everything she had lived into words. She wrote about what it was like to lose her husband, to have to give up the ring, to see her daughter go to sleep hungry. She spoke about the ticket, the turning point, the challenges even after the money. But above all, she spoke about courage, faith, and unconditional love. She posted her story on a small blog, like tossing a message in a bottle into the sea. Within days, the post began to spread. People from all over the country were commenting, sharing, getting emotional. Many said they had lost faith in miracles until they read Alyssa's story. Others shared their own battles. Mothers who, like her, had sacrificed everything for their children. What began as a simple post became a movement. Alyssa began receiving invitations to share her story at churches, events, even local radio shows. But she never wanted fame. All she wanted was for her experience to serve as a light for those still walking in the dark. With part of the money, she started a small community project in town, a kind of support network for single mothers in vulnerable situations. The name, Hands That Hold. There, women received basic food baskets, career guidance, emotional support. It was the kind of help Alyssa had dreamed of when she was hungry and never got. And that's where she understood something profound. The true value of what she lived wasn't in the millions she won, but in what she chose to do with them. Because in the end, the greatest prize of her life was turning pain into purpose. Emily was involved in the project from day one. She led music workshops for children, teaching the first notes to boys and girls who had never even had a toy. She saw there the power to transform, to multiply goodness. Once, while preparing for a project event, Alyssa looked at her daughter in the middle of a group of kids, laughing out loud, surrounded by little smiles. The girl who once went hungry was now feeding souls. That was more valuable than any bank account. That same night, sitting on the couch, Alyssa held the little ring box and said, "You know, sweetheart, sometimes I think your father never really left us." Emily looked at her mother with tenderness. "I think so too. Mom, he's here, in everything we've built." They hugged in silence, the kind of silence that says more than any word. And it was there, in that tight embrace, that Alyssa finally understood what it truly meant to be a brave mother. It wasn't about being perfect or about never falling, but about having the courage to rise again, to give up even what you love the most for someone you love even more. The souled ring came home. The love that was lost became a legacy. Hunger turned into abundance. Pain became a bridge. And Alyssa's story began to live on in every heart touched by her courage. But if you asked her today what the hardest part was, she wouldn't talk about poverty or loss or longing. She'd say the hardest part was believing things could still change, even when everything said they couldn't. And it was right there, in the middle of despair, that the miracle was born. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, don't leave without giving it a like. That tells us stories like this still matter. Subscribe to the channel to keep following powerful real-life stories of brave mothers who face the impossible for love. And if you can, share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen.